Hello, Imaginers. Thank you for tuning in live. Please let me know if you can hear me, if you can see me, if you can see Sarah as well. We are going live using Restream. So if you are viewing in the Imagen community, which is on Facebook, then before leaving a comment, please grant Restream permission. You can see the link right down there. That way we can see your name if and when you comment. So please go ahead and do that. My name is Wyden Kivowitz. I am the community manager here at Imagen. If we haven't met before, it's nice to meet you now. My goal here is to help you get the most out of Imagen, and today even Lightroom, so you can spend less time worrying about the tedious post-production and you can focus more on what you love. And today I'm chatting with the incredible Sarah Edmunds about speeding up Lightroom Classic, and we want you to be involved. So as a reminder, be sure to, go to that chat.restream.io/FB link that you see on the screen if you are viewing on Facebook, so we can see your name. And if you are watching live, please comment with the location where you're watching from. It's always fun to see where everybody's tuning in from. There will be more opportunities to share your thoughts with us and, of course, ask questions. And if you are watching the replay, if a friend shared this with you, I'm very happy you're here. Sorry you couldn't comment live. You'll know you're watching the replay because it says I was live instead of I am live. And if you are watching the replay, please comment with the word replay. So if you're brand new to Imagen, welcome. We are so glad that you're here with us. Sarah, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Scott. I am tuning in from Italy. So it's evening where I am, or starting to get towards evening, and it's always a pleasure to see you.
Yeah, same. I am in New Jersey. It is morning time, almost lunchtime, and it is a very cold 40-degree Fahrenheit, whatever the conversion is to Celsius, day. And
cold.
Cold. It is cold. Yeah. It's just been cold lately, but we're gonna warm things up today with some Lightroom Classic discussion. We have seen all over the internet over the many years that Lightroom has existed of people complaining about speed. It's sluggish here and there. And you and I were chatting about what are things that we could do to share. What could we share with the Imagen community about ways to speed this up, ways to just make it more efficient for everybody. And so what we've compiled are basically a variety of tips, and there's things that can make big speed boosts. There's things that can make tiny ones, but everything adds up. So
yeah, I teach a lot of photographers editing and retouching, working in Lightroom, and I've heard a lot of people who just say, I can't stand Lightroom, I just can't deal with it. And I've found that once I've shown them a few tips and tricks, they're just like, oh my God, I'm never going back. I can't believe it. This is incredible. So if you are, an Adobe Camera Raw hardcore fan and never ever want to use Lightroom, I just say, just give us a chance. Just have a listen, and you might find something that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Real quick, if you can keep speaking for a little bit, it looks like our stream to the Facebook group is not working, so I'm gonna post the YouTube link. So if you don't mind, while I'm doing that,
you just want me to just riff?
Yeah, keep going until I get this posted for everybody.
All right, wonderful. So I will just hammer on a little bit more about my love of Lightroom. So the reason that I love it, I have to say, I do use Adobe if you think about the fact that Adobe Camera Raw is actually incorporated in Lightroom, so it's really the same thing. Lightroom is using the same processing power, but what I love is that I'm able to adjust things on the fly while I'm organizing things. Everything is just there in front of me. And I think that there's a lot of misconceptions. I think people have a bad feeling with, or a bad experience with Lightroom, and then they think, no, I just don't like it, and then they kind of quit and just want to stick with what they know. I do have to say, though, that whenever I've tried to replicate the whole Adobe Camera Raw and Bridge experience, it feels very slow and cumbersome compared to ironically Lightroom. And so one of my
this one, it's the Macro Flash MF12.
Oh, sorry, 1 second. I just, oh my God, my iTunes just started for no reason.
That's funny.
So yeah, I was just hoping that what we could do is if we could help people speed up what is slowing down Lightroom for them, they'll just be able to take off.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So we put together this beautiful presentation, which I'm about to bring up on screen, and we're going to go slide by slide, talk about each thing that comes up, and go from there. So as we go through this, if you have any questions, please leave it in the comments. We will bring it up on screen and answer it for you. If we have to open up Lightroom, we'll do that and show you as well. But I've got a lot of screenshots here, so we should be able to get through this efficiently with that. So here we go. First off, we're starting with a bunch of very common, more like standard tips that really everybody should follow if they can, right? So things like your Lightroom catalog should be on your internal SSD drive, okay? Not necessarily on an external drive if you can avoid it. Because if Lightroom has to reference a catalog file and the other associated files to the catalog on an external drive, then it's going to be slower, especially if it's a spinning hard drive, right? If it's going to be external, if you can at least make it a USB 3 SSD, that helps a little bit. If it can be Thunderbolt, that helps a lot. So the fastest you can make it, if it has to be external, ideally internal. Smart previews, right? That goes alongside with your catalog file. So if your catalog is external, your smart previews are going to be external. Ideally, you want them to be internal, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead. You had something
We're
to say?
assuming that everybody knows what smart previews are, but if anybody doesn't or has a question about that, just go ahead and drop the question in the chat while we continue. I have a slightly different way of doing things. I like to keep, I use my working files. I keep everything on my SSD drive. And then as soon as I finish working on that, I will move the raw files off. But if you have the space to keep the project that you're working on all on the SSD as well, that's the best and the fastest. But I do understand that a lot of people work on an external drive, in which case then, keep the smart previews and the catalog. Always keep the catalog on your SSD. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So original files, they can be stored externally, right? Your original files are less important speed-wise for the storage location to be internal versus external. But at the same time, you want it to be a fast drive. So again, USB 3 or higher, something faster. Thunderbolt 4 is even out now. Thunderbolt 5 is around the corner, which is insane. And yeah, so having those on something fast will be good for that as well. Your cache, so not everybody realizes, but Lightroom does have a cache system. So by having your cache, again, on internal if possible, or a fast external SSD, that will also help. There's a lot of things that I don't think are obvious that Lightroom does. Like one thing that when we first started talking about this, Sarah, and you told me about the new preview file that's brand new to Lightroom. I had no idea that now it was a separate file. So there's a lot of things, these little things that are not obvious, that where they sit, where they live, can make an impact.
And what they do as well. So sometimes you can, we'll get to that later, I think, but we can delete certain things and it's not going to damage the whole structure if you need to free up space, that kind of thing. But
Yep. So some of the more, I would say the more obvious thing, like having as much RAM as possible, right? That's going to help Lightroom, just like any other software, right?
As much as you can afford.
Yeah. And you can, as you'll see, you can even adjust your Lightroom settings depending on what you have available. So you'll see that as well.
Yeah. People always say to me, how much RAM do I need? And I'm literally like, how much money do you just buy as much as you can, can. It's not gonna, you can't have too much. And I've always found that it's worth it. I've never regretted buying extra RAM. Let's put it that way, especially with the file sizes that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, for sure. There is a myth that using a tool like Imagen for culling or editing is going to slow Lightroom down. And I'm going to bust it right now and just share that Imagen has no impact on the speed of your Lightroom. A good example is if you use subject mask, right? The people say sometimes, oh, I did subject mask through Lightroom and now my Lightroom is slow. No, you've got subject mask. You've got masking in general on your photos in Lightroom. That's why Lightroom is slow. So as you'll learn, there's also workflows that you should be doing as far as if you're going to edit manually, doing things like local adjustments should be last, because the moment you do a local adjustment, Lightroom's going to slow down a little bit. So there's that. And yeah, limit the volume of presets that you installed. Now, this has been an ongoing thing for many years. If you've got thousands of presets like I used to have, Lightroom does tend to slow down, especially because by default, Lightroom does these dynamic previews of every preset that is installed for every single photo. So there's stuff, and you'll see again, there's ways to even turn that off. So, all right.
It helps you be more efficient as well. Generally, if you don't have a lot of clutter in your workspace, it's a bit like a surgeon operating. They don't have every tool that they need laid out in front of them, so they have to look around and look what they want. They just have exactly what they need. So if you can just get rid of everything that you don't need, all of those hundreds of, how much, usually have 1 or 2 presets, or let's say 5. That's, if you don't use it, just get rid of it.
Yep. And I just noticed that when I was updating this presentation, I forgot to remove the July 2022 from the bottom right. But I think I did on the rest of the slides, as you can see. Just that one. So that's fun. So like any other software, do not forget to close other resource-intensive software while using Lightroom Classic, as it will impact Lightroom speed. So that means don't have Photoshop open as well as Lightroom unless you absolutely need to. Don't have, I don't know, Chrome.
I was just going to say Chrome. That's always a surprising one. It's a real hog.
It really is. I've got that's my love-hate relationship with Chrome. Is like, I can't do things like use Restream or do my virtual podcast recording studio or any of these like modern things without Chrome. But at the same time, it's such a resource hog. So it's love-hate relationship. So keep that in mind. If you're on Mac OS, you can look in Activity Monitor and see what is being resource intensive as you have apps open, and you can close them. So, all right. So now we're going to dive into the different settings throughout the Lightroom interface, right? So starting with preferences, and you'll see these arrows. This gives you an idea of like where we are in each of these fields. I'm hearing echo. Let me just see if I have to turn on cancel. Test. Okay.
Yeah, my microphone is kind of cutting in and out. Is that okay?
Yep, I hear you.
All right.
All right. So starting with the top, you got here in most cases. Graphics processor can be set to auto. Lightroom will automatically check what graphics processor you have on your machine, and it can automatically adjust its configuration for the optimal settings for that computer specifically. If you're finding that you're still having some sluggishness after going through all of this, go back to this performance and mess around with the settings, switch it from auto to different manual configurations, and see what works best for your computer. But otherwise, typically, auto should be good for most computers. All right. So that's number 1. Why is it not changing slides? Here it goes. Okay. Number 2, set your camera raw cache size. So this is where a lot of people overlook, forgetting that Lightroom has cache. Not only that, but you can choose the location of the cache. So again, internal is best. External if you're just seriously don't have the space and you need to. And you can set the size of the cache. So if you can, choose a good location for the cache, and also set it to a very high storage limit. If you have the storage space to spare, use it for your cache, because the more cache you have for the raw data, the faster Lightroom will be going through those raw files, right?
Yeah.
All right. Feel free to cut me off, Sarah, if you want to chime in any of this.
No, that's fine. Yeah. It's I've experimented with that as well, and yeah. Go if you then definitely go in and have a play around with those figures.
Awesome. So not everybody does a lot of video work, especially inside of Lightroom. But if you do, then I would also suggest messing with your video cache size as well, because that will help with that as you scroll through everything and do the little bit of video editing that Lightroom allows. This would allow you to help make that more efficient as well. So because I store videos inside of Lightroom in my catalog, I have that up pretty high, and I have up my camera raw cache also very, very, very high. Now, we did talk about smart previews earlier. This is where this becomes really, really important for ensuring Lightroom is as fast as possible, because if you check this, then Lightroom will always access the smart previews first before accessing the original raw image, right? That way, it's accessing a smaller version of your raw file, which in turn makes it load faster. I do see there's a question. What is, let me bring it up on screen from Wendy. Wendy, what is lost when the cache is purged? Great question. It's not any of your edit data at all. It's just the files. It's like when you go to, if you open up a browser, right, and you go to imaginai.com, it's going to download all the photos or GIFs or whatever is going on, any of the font files. It's going to download that to your computer locally, so that next time you go to Imagen, it runs faster. That's basically what Lightroom is doing with the video cache and the camera raw cache, is it's making these like smaller versions of them so that next time you go back to it, it loads faster. So that is what the cache does for you. So if you purge it, it just means it has to rebuild that cache again next time you go back to it. So it just means next time you go back to it, it loads again, like the original speed rather than
nothing is lost that can't be, that Lightroom won't get back by itself. So you would purge it if you were desperate for space and you were just like trying to. Otherwise, I mean, I don't think I've ever gone to purge the cache.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so Sarah, do you agree? Use smart previews?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're on the same page in that. That way you get the fastest possible, loading of your photos.
Yeah.
Always.
And it also means that you have the great advantage of, if your originals are on an external disk and you don't want to constantly carry, I work most of the time on my MacBook Pro, and I do have an external disk, but it's a pain in the behind having to kind of carry the two things attached, or you've got to sort of safe eject it and all of that kind of stuff. Well, if you have smart previews on your local drive, you can just unplug your originals and you can just work off those mini smart previews. And you can also send, if I'm not wrong, Scott, you can then send your work to Imagen and get it back from Imagen just with the smart previews.
Yeah. So in fact, it does make the upload process, the editing process faster, the culling process faster, simply because smart previews are there. We don't have to do our own compression. It's just
exactly. And then you only need to plug in to access the originals, and Lightroom does all of the connecting by itself, so you don't have to worry about that. Yep. But let's just say you finished all of your edits from Imagen, you've done your fine tuning, you've done your tweaking, you've even sent your fine tunes back to Imagen. Now, let's say you need to export the high-res images, or you want to just go open them up in Photoshop and do some retouches, then you can attach your external disk. And so it's kind of a whole workflow that works together. So you're not only, even if you are attached to the originals, having those smart previews makes the edits faster, but you can just eject that whole drive and just do all of your work and your culling and your fine-tuning without the originals.
100%. There is another thing in this one slide that I don't think I made an arrow for, so I'm going to just mention it. It's this enable hover preview of presets in loop. this is what I was talking about when I talked about the presets, which is if you have that checked, Lightroom's basically going to build a preview of how that photo would look as you hover over any preset in your develop module. So by unchecking that, it can in theory speed up the develop module, because when you go, even if you accidentally hover over a preset, you're not waiting for Lightroom to make that preview of it. It'll just do nothing unless you actually click it. So I recommend to uncheck that. You don't really need it. If you really want it, it's not going to make or break Lightroom speed, but it's just, again, these little things, they just all add up over time.
Yeah,
so
and it's going to make your workflow more. If we're talking about professional wedding photographers who have their look dialed in, you don't need that, because you're not shopping for new preset looks. You're trying to keep consistency, so you don't need that anyway, and it's going to stop distractions as well. Because I know I do get distracted. I'm like, oh, look at this.
Yeah,
we don't want to be doing that.
Yeah, yep, 100%. Cool. All right. So optimize your catalog. Lightroom typically will prompt you every so often to do this automatically, but I recommend, especially if you've got a large catalog like I do, but this is like defragging your hard drive, right? For Windows users, you're used to that whole defragging language. Mac OS doesn't really have it, but it does do it. It's just automatic. So this is where you click that every so often. It takes 10 minutes, depending on the size of the catalog. It'll reload Lightroom for you, and now your catalog is optimized. It's basically cleaning up all the data to make sure it can run at its optimal speed. So for those who have one catalog a job, a client, one catalog a month, this is less important. But it's for the bigger one catalog a year, or one like me. I've got one massive 400,000 photo catalog. It's very important for me to do that as often as possible.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right. Now let's go into the catalog setting. So actually, there's two ways to get to that. One is to click that go to catalog setting. The other is also from like the file, then catalog setting. It gets you to here, and this is where Sarah has her method. I have my method. There's no wrong way to do this. You have to find what works best for your machine, in my opinion, more than anything. It's going to be different depending on how much hard drive space you have, how much RAM you have, all that stuff, the graphics processor, everything. But preview sizes, which is under the file handling tab inside of catalog settings. So I set mine to the smallest as possible. Ideally, you should go to what is comfortable on the size of your main editing screen. Okay, so bigger if you've got a very large monitor editing with the photo huge. Smaller if you use a laptop, you don't need it to be too big, and so on. And then I set my preview quality to medium and discard after 30 days. I figure if I'm editing a photo, I want to be a good size fast preview, but then after 30 days I should be done with that. I don't need the preview anymore. Let it rebuild if I need it.
Exactly. So just in case there are some people who don't know how these work and why it makes a difference. The preview is Lightroom's rendering of the image at full size. Now, if you're working with very high resolution images, if you generate one-to-one previews, that's a visualization of the raw file at its full size. So clearly that's going to take up a lot of space. It's going to take some time to generate, but once it's generated, if you want to be able to zoom in to check focus on eyes, for example, scrolling through at 100%, if you let Lightroom generate all of those one-to-one previews, that's going to be a lot faster. If you wait for Lightroom, if you've ever clicked on an image and tried to go to zoom in and you're waiting for Lightroom to display the image, the reason you're waiting is that Lightroom is generating the one-to-one preview because it hasn't already been generated. So there are different schools of thought, and I've experimented with various ones. And are you going to talk about the import settings in a sec, a little bit later?
Yeah, I think it comes up a little bit later.
Okay, I'll wait then to talk more about that.
Okay. All right.
And also you can discard your one-to-one previews at any time.
Anytime,
if you want to. If you're running out of hard disk space, you can purge all of those previews to clear up the space, and Lightroom will just automatically regenerate them as and when you need them. So that can be useful if you find that you're starting to run out of space.
For everybody watching live, does everybody know what one-to-one preview is? If you don't, just add in the comment, what is it? Yeah. What is one-to-one? And we'll get to that. Otherwise, we'll keep going because there's a lot to get to here. So
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Under the metadata tab in catalog settings is something, again, this depends on your situation. So to me, I actually leave this on because I use XMP files. I am assuming, I'm going to guess that Sarah does because she does a lot of Photoshop work too.
Yeah.
So Wendy wants to know what one-to-one is. Okay, Wendy, we'll get to that in 1 second. But if you don't need XMP files, turn it off. And the reason for that is because if you have it on, when you stop moving your mouse in Lightroom, it's going to, behind the scenes, start writing XMP files for every edit that you've ever made, for any color or star or flag. All the metadata will all be written to an XMP file, which are sidecar files. And that takes up time and can slow Lightroom down. So if you don't need it, turn it off. But if you're like me, leave it on. If you use it, if you're like Sarah and you need it, leave it on. Whatever it might be.
I don't always need it. But I do. I've done both, and I've regretted both decisions. Well,
That's great.
I don't know what to say. Hang on, my iTunes keeps starting for some reason. I need to quit it. Hang on.
Oh, that's funny.
So yeah, I've gone back to find old catalogs, not old catalogs. I've lost a catalog. I've gone back to find the folder of original raw files. And if I have written all of my edits to the XMP files, I wouldn't have lost because I lost the hard drive with the catalog on it. I wouldn't have, but having said that, I do prefer, I don't need it other than that though. All of the edits are in the Lightroom catalog. So I use Lightroom for everything. The one time where I do need an XMP file is if I need to send the raw file to somebody else to retouch, and and I just need to send the raw file and the raw edit with the XMP file. So then I will send that or another way would be to save as a DNG, but that's another thing.
Oh yeah,
but some people. So if you're just working in Lightroom and you're not sending that, let's say that you're quite happy to back up your Lightroom catalog, which you should do. So if you're backing up your Lightroom catalog in two places, you're not going to have the problem that I had, which was that I lost my catalog. And so, yeah, you can quite easily turn that off. I don't think I need it to open in Photoshop. So I don't think that's a thing.
All right, cool. So Wendy did want to know, Sarah, do you want to explain what one-to-one is?
What is one-to-one? It's a full-size visualization of your file at its maximum size. So if you've got a high resolution image, it's going to generate a rendering, let's say an approximation of what that looks like on the screen. Now it's a raw file, so it's not going to show you everything, but it's going to give you a picture so that you can look at it and you can edit it and you can decide if you want to keep it. If you have a small or an medium or large or whatever, it's going to be smaller than the original size. One-to-one is a pixel per pixel ratio. So it's a big file. So imagine if you've got hundreds of thousands of images, it's going to be very, very resource heavy to generate one-to-one images for all of them. But it does mean that you can very, very quickly zoom in and out without having to wait for Lightroom to visualize it.
Yep, 100%. All right. Next in the same metadata settings under catalog settings is turning off the GPS part, right? If you don't use the map feature in Lightroom, if you have no need for it, first of all, you can hide that entire tab. And second, you could even turn off the address lookup. So it's not trying to even utilize the map feature even behind the scenes. This
is a really big one. This will make a big difference.
Yeah. Now I'm I haven't in unfortunately too long, but I do a lot of photo trips, or used to pre-COVID, where I just go and just shoot landscapes wherever I am with a bunch of photo friends. And in that case, I do use the map feature because I want to remember where I was at that exact point in the world.
Mm.
So like I have it on, but if I was like, I've got a catalog that is for demo purposes for Imagen, I have it off. I don't need it. Like, make it
Yeah.
faster. I don't need it. Right. So
Yeah.
you might have a commercial job for a client, and they might want the location data in it. So at that point, you might need it on for the catalog. So, all right. Similar, this is another biggie, is facial recognition. Could be useful in some cases. I would say 90% of professionals probably don't need the feature.
Yeah.
But I could definitely see points where, depending on the job, you might need it for something. But again, this will be running all the time unless you turn it off. So if you don't need facial recognition, turn that sucker off.
This might be a good reason to have separate catalogs for separate things, because
Yeah.
you could have different settings for one catalog and different settings for another, right?
Yep.
So you're working, let's say if you're a wedding photographer and you're shooting weddings, then it might be wise to have one that's kind of a down to business, serious working tool. And then if you wanted to detect faces for all of your personal photographs, then you could have that in a different catalog, maybe.
Totally. Yep. All right. Now we're getting to the import side of things. So this is one. Do you want to talk about this? This is one where you've got a very strong preference for importing.
I have a strong preference that changes often. So I've tried everything. I've tried a little bit of everything. So for a while, I used to load everything in as one-to-one. And I would do that. Let's say I would get home from my wedding or my shoot, and I would import stick my card in, Lightroom would pop up, I would import everything. And because I would do my culling in Lightroom, I would just let it generate one-to-one previews as I would go to bed and just leave it to generate one-to-one previews, so that when I woke up in the morning, everything's there. And then you can go through like lightning and even zoom in really close and check focus and cull. I've since realized that I don't need that. So at the moment, what I'm experimenting with is being a little bit more efficient. I haven't decided yet which is best. And what I do now is build previews. I just have the embedded preview, the embedded JPEG preview. So what that does is that it turns Lightroom into photo mechanic. So it works very, very similarly. So what it's doing is it's just importing very, very quickly. And so I can just quickly go through and make my initial cull. Then I just take my initial cull and I put that into a collection. So I'm not kind of using up all of that time and resources and energy and space building one-to-one previews. So that's my current process, and I'm quite happy with that at the moment. It works quite well because I've decided that I don't need to zoom in on my initial cull. I don't need to check absolute perfect focus. I just need to really just see, do I like the composition of the image? Does the image appeal to me? Is it a pleasing overall image? That's my first cull. I'll find out when I'm editing if something is off focus, if something is soft. So that's where I'm at the moment. Yeah.
I think for those watching right now, I think you're probably hopefully you're realizing that everything we're going through is yes, it's advice, but a lot of it is personal preference. So we're giving you guidance as far as like, here's what could be more efficient, but at the same time, as you heard, like Sarah, she used to do one-to-one. She doesn't need it anymore. She doesn't think, she's experimenting still. So she's trying embedded over standard because that could be faster. It's all a matter of what works best for the person, but it's still more efficient. So, it could be that you might want one-to-one during import, or because you do want to dig into each and every photo as your cull, versus Sarah's approach where my first pass, I don't need to zoom in that close and see all the details. I'd rather get a quick overview to get through it faster to then do the second cull, or whatever it might be.
Exactly. So, and also I like to have Imagen. I send it to Imagen to do, before I do my second cull, I send it to Imagen because I want to see it edited before I make my mind up. So I will do my first cull, send it to Imagen, bring it back, and then I will see. And so what you can do then, if you wanted to, is that on the selection that you're doing the second cull in, then you could just select all of those images and generate one-to-one. So you can generate the one-to-one at any time, and you can purge the one-to-ones at any time.
Yeah.
So the important thing to remember is that if Lightroom is slow when you zoom in, when you go to full length, and it's taking time, it's because it's generating a preview for you. So all you have to do is get those generated, set them to generate, go get a cup of coffee, come back, they'll be generated. So if that's what's frustrating you.
Yep, totally. All right. So just for me, I have it set to standard. I am going to experiment with embedded. I haven't yet, but for years I've had it set to standard. And it's been okay for me, but I am curious. I might even time it. I might time it, like do a screen recording and actually have a time to see how fast is it to go through. Yeah. All right. So going back to smart previews, you want to build these on import. Do this. You're already setting Lightroom to support and give preference to smart previews. So at the time of importing, build those smart previews so that you're ahead of the game, and now Lightroom is going to work faster for you. By using those first, because they've been generated during import. Of course, checking this slows down the import process a little bit, but it saves you in the long haul, so it's worth it.
Yeah.
Okay. I recommend not implementing develop settings during import, especially if you are an Imagen user, because you have to remember that Imagen will override your edit, 100% of your edits. So if you do any edit on import, that is a case to not do it. However, I will say, going back to what Sarah just said with the approach of edit before cull, you could, if you originally had, let's say pre-Imagen, you had a preset that you use most of the time, and you want to get an idea of like, here's how my edits might look post, with Imagen before I do the cull, then you can apply that preset you used to use during import, just knowing that it's going to be overwritten anyway. So, but that will slow down Lightroom's import process, and potentially, depending on what the develop preset does, like if you do local adjustments in the preset, could slow down Lightroom even after.
I always recommend not doing this, because you can't, for some reason, if you go to the develop module and you click Y to see the before and after, it will show you the import develop as your. It doesn't show you the raw file, which gets on my nerves. I like to be able to see the raw file, to see what the original colors were, just to see what to kind of keep me grounded in reality, so to speak. So that for that reason only, I never do it.
Yeah. Very good point. Very good point. All right. Adding metadata preset is okay. It's like adding a copyright on import. That has no impact. I just wanted to point it out because I know they are like sort of right next to each other. So I wanted to point that out. Sure, it will slow Lightroom down a tiny millisecond during the import process, but import alone, it won't impact Lightroom speed otherwise by adding a metadata preset. I do this. I add my copyright 100% of the time during import. So, okay. If you are watching live, do you use a Lightroom plugin? If you do, I mean like one that, like for example, JPEG Mini or Loop Deck or Flickr, XR Search. You see, I got a whole bunch up on the screen right now. But are you using a Lightroom plugin? Please comment with which ones you are. I am very curious. And what I would say is, if you have a bunch of Lightroom plugins installed, disable the ones that you do not use on a regular basis. Or I might even say, disable the ones that disable the ones you don't use on a daily basis, because you can always reactivate them. So, good example is Loop Deck, which is now it was acquired by Logitech, I believe. Yes, it was acquired by Logitech. Fantastic device. Tourbox, fantastic device. These are like editing consoles, right? I have a Loop Deck that I love, but it slows Lightroom down. So does Tourbox. Any of these devices will slow Lightroom down. So if you can, disable them. So for example, I use Imagen, right, to edit my photos, to cull through my photos. If I need to do any additional adjustments, I just go back to the plugin manager. I re-enable Loop Deck, open the Loop Deck app, plug in my Loop Deck, and now I can use Loop Deck to do my my final edits on all those photos, right? And then I can disable it again when I don't need it anymore. So yeah, there's a lot that are resource intensive and will slow down Lightroom, but there's some cool Lightroom plugins out there that
So
I love.
Lightroom is incredibly versatile, and it does so many things, but you don't need all of them. So if you're a serious professional user, it's just a question of realizing what those things that you don't need, and really streamlining the process for serious use.
Yep. Here's a great question from Monica. Okay.
Do you know the answer? I don't.
I have my answer. So I recently switched away from the. Do you say Wacom or Wacom?
I say Wacom because
okay,
I'm in Italy, so that's how they would pronounce it.
So I say Wacom. I switched to ZenSlab, I believe is what it's called, the brand. I have it next to me. So I found over the years that the Wacom the software for Wacom itself got slower. Not Lightroom. Not the Lightroom interface with it. Not the talking between the two, but rather the Wacom software itself. So I bought myself a ZenSlab. By the way, I used Wacom for 13, 14 years. I've had so many of them. So like they made that industry, right? They've innovated so much, and they still continue to innovate in that industry. But I picked up a ZenSlab, I think last Black Friday, and it's faster. I hate to say it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was an alternative to Wacom.
Yeah, there's a lot, but some of them are like too cheapy to like even be on the same plane. Okay. But the ZenSlab one is very comparable. So yeah, that's that. I mean, I still love Wacom, and I will always support them because they've served me well over the years. But yeah, so it's not, that wouldn't be a Lightroom thing. It would be unfortunately a Wacom thing.
Yeah, I've noticed that that software is kind of slow and buggy, and yeah,
it's sad. I hope that they figure out what it is and get it worked out. So okay, now let's talk about the regular library view. There are certain things in the library view that, again, little things that make a big impact. So for one, hiding the hiding the histogram module in the library view, because if it's visible, it's literally got to figure out what the histogram is for every single photo. So unless you're editing with the histogram, hide the thing because you don't need it, right? Yeah. Again, this is one of those personal things. If you use it, don't hide it. But if you don't need it, hide it.
I use it because I tend to edit for people who are printing. So it's very important for me to know that I'm not clipping any shadows or stuff like that. But, I can just open the histogram for when I need it.
Yep, definitely. Okay. Use Quick Develop in the library view instead of editing in the develop view as often as you can. Not only does it edit faster by using these like JPEG previews, these the standard preview, if you do the 1-to-1, if you use the embedded, it uses those rather than the original raw file. Okay, so you're editing faster by using the quick develop feature, simply because you're editing on the previews. And the extra benefit is it's all relative edits rather than individual edits, which means you can do a relative exposure adjustment on all of the photos in the library view if you want, rather than one by one.
Okay, but you have to explain what relative means.
Yeah. So relative is like, if my exposure is here, is at 0, right? Let's say your exposure is at 0. Relative is bump everything up 1 or bump everything up 0.5. Like it's not saying make it 1. It's saying bump it all up 1. So if it's at 6, that this one, and if photo A is at 6 and photo B is at 7 and you're bumping it up 1. Now one's at 7 and one's at 8. So it's relatively bumping things up.
This is huge. This is so important, especially in concomitance. Is that a word in English? Concomitance? Yeah. With Imagen. So Imagen sends you back an edit that is very close to where you need it to be. If you're looking at everything in the grid view, you can immediately pick out the ones that are slightly underexposed compared to the rest of them, select those two, and just bump it up. I always use the word bump. If I say bump, I mean I'm clicking that arrow. Yeah. And if you press shift and then click, you can. So a one arrow click is a third of a stop. If you shift click, it's a sixth of a stop. If you click two arrows, it's one whole stop. So you can very, very quickly and efficiently adjust the exposure, keeping everything looking consistent. It's very difficult to make things consistent if you're editing one by one. So if you're working on a slider and then you move to the next one and you work on a slider, then you move on to, by the time you get to image number 5, it's completely different from image number 1. And that's why then you're going back and forth and you go back to the beginning and you start re-editing everything because you want to get it to how it is towards the end of the catalog. So working in that grid view is super, super fast. And that's how I've actually done it live on YouTube, where I've done a whole wedding of 1,500 images in 1 hour, including fine tunes. And that's by using that.
Yeah. It's one of these features that I find that when I tell somebody about this and they try it, they're like, why have I not been doing this for 5 years?
Yeah. Why have I been like sliding, trying to get my pen to sort of slide?
Yeah. So Monica said, I use the histogram, the develop module, but not in the library module. Great tip. There you go. Yep. All right. Next, in the library, or I guess really any view at this point, if you do not use Lightroom CC or Lightroom Mobile, stop syncing. There's no reason for that to be constantly running and trying to sync things that don't need to be synced in the background. So disable that if you don't use it. If you do, I use it, so I have it going. But if you don't, stop it.
Yeah, I don't, because the storage isn't enough. So I just, I'm like, whatever, get rid of it.
I am curious on your take on something when we get to the end about the recent update to CC. Okay. We got 2 slides left. When in the develop module, it will start with the smart preview or other preview until you zoom in. Once you zoom in, it then shows the original if available. And if you generate one-on-one previews on import, then the zoom, as Sarah has mentioned, loads faster. So this is just a recap of here's why you should use smart previews. Here's why you should consider one-to-one previews if you do need to zoom in often, and how it impacts things overall when you actually get to the develop module, which then that is when you start seeing the bigger slowdowns in Lightroom, because that's when Lightroom has to access the originals, show you every edit that is done in its little fine details, including local adjustments, and give you control over everything. So there's not many ways to speed Lightroom's develop module up, but this is one of them.
Yeah. So. And it might be that once you understand how this works, you can then make decisions accordingly. So what I like to do is get everything as close as possible just in the library module, so that I'm really not looking at anything in develop as much as possible, and then I will get everything onto a gallery. So everything is just that the client's got their photos, especially for weddings. They just want their pictures, right? They don't care if it's tweaked or that this subject mask has been brought out. They just want to see their pictures. This is my philosophy now, after many years of nearly burning myself out and having a nervous breakdown from over doing too much editing, basically. So I now just do that, get it delivered. Then you can maybe make a selection of the top, say 200 images, the ones that are going to go into the album. Those can be much more fine-tuned. Maybe those you can select, generate in one-to-one, fine-tune those, get those looking absolutely perfect, add your radial filters and your masks or whatever it is you want to do, maybe retouch in Photoshop, and just keep that down to the core. But that sort of 800 image or 1,000 images that you need to get, the pictures of the guests and the, that kind of thing, you really don't need to be going one-to-one and zooming in and kind of doing all of that detail.
Yep. All right. Last, but definitely not least, is local adjustments. I've brought this up many times throughout this conversation, but using local adjustments, spot removal, brushing, any of these new AI masks that are inside of Lightroom, all of these things, yes, they can make huge impacts on your photos, right? Removing blemishes or power lines or exit signs or bumping up and making your subjects pop, changing the sky, all these things, but they all slow Lightroom down. So I recommend to apply any local adjustments that you want to do at the end.
Yeah.
Wait till you're all done, you figured everything out, and then apply whatever local adjustments you have to, because I'm telling you, the moment you do, that's when it starts to slow down even more.
Yeah. And also you might, this happens to me. I don't know if this happens to you, Scott, but if I get too carried away on an image and I start adding masks and radial and I start adding this, and then I drop in a sky and I bring those down, I look at it the next day and I'm like, what was I thinking? It's way too much. Like I've done too much to this image. So if you kind of get the whole catalog done first, it helps just to kind of, also because if you start doing that kind of level of detail early on in the catalog and then you've got to keep that going all the way through, it's really going to slow you down as well. It's going to slow you down, not just Lightroom.
Yeah, yeah. I was at I went to Sam Hurd's one of his workshops a couple months ago in New York City, and he was showing editing after the couple left, and the couple that came to model, and he was showing how he was using local adjustments, and I was like, this is great. I've never thought about going this above and beyond with like radials, for example, the way that he was doing it. And then I started trying it. I'm like, wow, this really does look really cool on my own photos. But then I'm like, whoa, Lightroom got slow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's not even just like adding one. It's like when you add a lot, it just
when you've got a lot of it's I've got a preset that does, like, you press one button and it goes and it like kind of does a whole load of presets, and it's really, really cool. But yeah, on a limited number of images, and then just at the end. So yeah, select your favorites and then give that special love to them if you're going to do it.
Awesome.
By the way, also, like the way Lightroom is engineered is that you're supposed to go down in the order that they've done things.
Right.
So don't go to the curve first and then come back to the basic, but go through the basic first, and then only if you need it, then do the curve. And then, so it's in that order for a reason.
Yep.
And then once you're down at the very bottom, then you can go to the local adjustments if you need it.
Yeah. So we got a few minutes left. I'm curious, how much do you pay attention to Lightroom CC and what they add to that application?
Oh, I've never used it.
That's so funny. So Adobe added, as you mentioned, like the cloud storage that they had, right? So Lightroom CC, the whole thing has always been, since they came out, it's cloud based, right? What they added recently was now it's actually local as well. So you can actually browse from any folder as if it was Bridge. You just drop in a folder and it loads it up, looking like Lightroom Classic as far as like the folder structure, and then you can just click into a folder and.
If only they offered unlimited storage, that would be amazing.
If they offered it.
Yeah, if they don't get what have you got, like 200? It's just not enough.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
It's not enough space.
Yeah.
So it makes it makes it unworkable for me.
Yeah, this update has me intrigued now that they're like doing cloud and local. It's just really, really interesting. I was curious, but okay, so.
Monica was hoping we had a tip for fixing the Lightroom local adjustment slowdown problem.
Oh, sorry, there's nothing that Sarah or I can do to
help
that too much. Just limit and wait till the end.
Less is more anyway. This is what I'm
Yeah.
discovering. I've gone back. I've been going back through some of my old stuff. I wanted to kind of repurpose a lot of some of my old work, and I found that with time, I find that I'm doing less and less and less, not more and more and more. So yeah, less is more. I'm finding. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I use subject masks by Imagen, they are there for most of the photos early in the process. Yes, you're right. That's actually why we, when you go through the process, we actually recommend not doing subject mask on a project where you're editing 3,000 photos, for example. You might want to say, these photos, these 20 photos, I want to apply subject mask to. I'm going to do a project with that. Or let's say, I'm going to do subject mask on these with 100 photos, but the rest of of these 3,000 or whatever you're doing are just going to be plain edits, right? Without subject mask. It's all figuring out what works best for you in your workflow. And again, like if you do subject mask on big project, you're only going to, if you follow everything that we've talked about today, you're only going to experience slowdowns with local adjustments if you go into the develop module. If you stay in the library view, you won't experience a slowdown from local adjustments because you're not viewing the original file. Your computer's not trying to access it. You're going to be doing it from a preview, so it'll be much, much, much faster.
So that's a tip. That's a good tip.
Yeah, there's a little tip for you.
Yeah.
So, one thing I want to mention before we wrap this up is on December 6th, I'm doing the next Imaginers Meet. These are a Google Meet call that everybody is welcome to join. It's limited to 25 people. And it's just a friendly hangout where we get together and do a little round table of discussion, little icebreaker, and then talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about, whether it's Imagen, whether it's something else in your workflow, to wait for Imaginers to connect and try to help each other face-to-face, on camera, with audio, and in a fun chat environment. So please feel free to join. Just scan that QR code there. You can also go to the Imagen community as well, and you'll see a link from there where you can also sign up for the Imaginers Meet. So there is that. Sarah, anything that you want to mention, bring up before we wrap up?
Very quickly, I've noticed that some people have said that they want to avoid having a catalog. I've just seen that online a few times, people saying, I want to avoid having a catalog. I don't want to. And I'm wondering if that's because the catalog becomes very big and bloated. You might find that the part that's actually bloated is the previews file. So every Lightroom catalog comes with a series of files. So there's the LR-cat, which is the actual catalog. Then there's the smart previews file. If you have one, if you generated one, there's a previews file. And then there's the LR-cat data, which is it LR-cat data or LR data? I can't remember, but it's got data in it anyway.
Yep.
So the data file has got all of your masking in it. So if you delete that file, you will lose all of your local adjustments and your masks. The previews file, if you get desperate and you've run out of space, you've run out of hard disk space, and you've got a 90 gigabyte previews file, and you can't open nothing. This has happened to me. I can't open Lightroom because I've run out of space. I've deleted the previews file. That will enable me to open Lightroom. All of your edits will still be there because the catalog is there, and the previews file will just be regenerated, and Lightroom will start to. So what I did was I deleted the previews file, went to delete some other stuff in order to get my machine working again, and then that was so if you're kind of thinking, oh, the Lightroom catalog's massive, I don't want that. Just remember that doesn't have to be a permanent thing. And if you do get into a bind, you can delete that. Remember, you can always purge your one-to-one previews, or as I said, if you get into a bind, you can actually delete that previews catalog, and then the next time you open Lightroom, that will be regenerated for you. Nothing bad will happen. Yep. I think that's right. Anyway, hope I haven't.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to do that, for fun. But it's just if you're desperate.
You definitely don't want to do it for fun.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Sarah, for hopping in, for spending time and chatting and sharing your thoughts on all this as well. I hope everybody who's watching live you know, was walking away with some things to check or uncheck in their Lightroom various settings. Hopefully, maybe you have already while you've been watching. Which
yeah, give it and let us know how
great.
it goes. So post in the community about any results or any questions you have, and we can get back to you.
Awesome. So with that, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody who's been tuning in. Thank you to everybody who's watching replay. Until next time.
Bye.